Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get to Know the Real Estate Ecosystem. In our first episode, we talked about how real estate education is broken and why the current system often leaves both agents and consumers exposed. Today, we are going deeper, focusing on why experience alone isn't enough and how structured education actually creates competence. Buying and selling a home for the first time can feel confusing, especially because buyers and sellers often see the same transactions very differently. Buyers think they are being logical, whereas sellers think that they are being fair, and both are usually wrong in different ways. Today, we are talking about what competence actually looks like when both the sides of a deal collide. We are breaking this down from both sides of the deal: what buyers worry about, what sellers worry about, and how a good agent helps both the sides move forward with clarity and confidence. So, Jeff, are you ready?
I am ready, Anisha. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Jeff. So let's begin. My first question would be, Jeff, that buyers come in focused on what they are approved for, while sellers focus on what they want for their home. How do you help both the sides understand what is realistic?
Well, actually, I try to have them put different hats on, and that's how we start. I always tell sellers, put your buyer's hat on. If you are a buyer, what would be the items in this home or the things about this home that will prompt you to buy? And a lot of that has to do with price. So sellers have to understand that the buyer, when they put their house on the market, it's no longer their home. It's now a commodity, and it's up against every other home that's on the market based on prices of homes that sold recently in that area. So that's why when I go to a home, I not only talk about how to stage, but we talk about pricing and how important pricing is, because it is the pricing that's going to prompt buyers to come look at the home. Even though sellers think their house is worth more than it really is, because it's their home. It's where their families grew up, and therefore their mindset's a little different. So usually a seller puts their house on the market with their heart, but they eventually sell their home with their head, meaning market. Conversely, with buyers, you ask them to put their seller's hat on. If you were a seller looking at what else is sold out there, would you pay this for that house? Or would you buy this house for that? Or would you accept an offer based on this? And so the buyers have to know the market. And now you had asked about affordability. So affordability is a big term these days, and we know it, right? It's always been. So a buyer can't just have to go after a house that fits what they're approved for. They have to realize that they have to buy a home with payments that they are comfortable with. And that's really important to know. So usually buyers will buy with their head. Buyers will offer with their head, but will buy with their heart. So they'll go a little extra further on the price because this is the right house for them. So if as an agent, you have to think both ways. If the buyer had the seller's hat on, what would happen if the sellers had the buyer's hat on? Because then their mindset changes a lot. They have to realize that there's two sides to a transaction, not just one.
Understood. Coming to the buyer's side, what is the biggest financial lie buyers tell themselves?
Biggest financial lie? That's a really interesting question. The biggest financial lie is that, well, so according what kind of market it's in. In a buyer's market, the biggest lie is that they are going to get a house for a steal, right? Because they hear that the buyers are getting great prices, but they don't realize there's a seller's side. As opposed to a seller's side, when it's a seller's market, the buyer thinks that just offering full price is good enough, but they don't realize that the market has changed a lot, even the whole market when it comes to pricing a home. We are now what is known as in the eBay effect. eBay effect means that you're putting a house on the market not at the height to get wiggle room for the seller, but actually pricing it at market or just below market to create a bidding war, because you'll get a pent-up demand. So buyers have to understand that they're going to end up probably paying more for a home than what it's listed for. Not in all cases. And again, it's in what market we're in. Like in our market in New Jersey, we're still seeing bidding wars. But if you are buying in Florida, in some of the areas of Florida and Texas, prices are going down as opposed to New Jersey going up. So Like any real estate, it's very local. So I don't know if it's lying to themselves as much as not knowing the market enough to go forward. Like I know there's buyers that are out there that are always looking for sale by owners. The reason why they look for sale by owners is not because they don't want to use a realtor, because I'm going to tell you, a realtor helps them the most, is because they think they can buy the home for less than market value because they're thinking, well, the seller's not paying commission, so I can at least start less than whatever the local commissions are. And then the seller thinks they're going to sell a home as for sale by owner because they don't need to pay a realtor. But they don't realize that only 9% of homes are sold by for sale by owners. So I know I went a little beyond the question of why buyers think they lie to himself. I don't think it's really lying to himself. I think it's just the fact that they are still trying to understand the market, especially first time home buyers. And they need someone to direct them, put them in that direction.
Jeff, while you were answering this question, I just had a thought in mind. Why is there fluctuation in markets? Like you just said that New Jersey has is expensive, right?
Yes.
And why is that? Why is that Florida and any other state or any other country they are not so expensive?
Well, some areas are still doing very well. Connecticut, Rhode Island, they're still going through bidding wars. If you think about it, it has to do with land, availability of housing. Texas is huge, and there's still a lot of room to grow, a lot of room to build. And so people that are reselling their home are competing against new construction. Same thing with Florida. People that are trying to resell their home are competing against new construction, which is about the same price. So I'll ask you that question. If you had a choice of new versus used, which one would you take? You would take new, right?
Yes.
Yes, New Jersey is very limited. And I'm seeing in New Jersey now that there is more rentals being built than fee simple homes. You drive up and down the highways, all you see is rentals, rentals, rentals. So there's a big change in that too, which means it reduces land to build on for homes because they're building rentals. And that's a big problem. I live in northern New Jersey. Northern New Jersey's average price right now is $865,000. Nuts if you think about it. And it's not getting cheaper unless you move out further, out more in the boonies, as they say.
It. And what do sellers misunderstand about the pricing structure?
So it's all according who's selling. Like if they bought their home several years and years ago, they're thinking about when they bought their home, right? They knew that they can make an offer on a house and therefore, not because of market, because that's the way the market was then. Seller would put their house in the market and then the buyer would make an offer and then they would negotiate something in the middle, right? So sellers think that they should leave wiggle room in their pricing. Buyers are much smarter now. Not that they weren't smart back then. Back then, 20, 25 years ago, they didn't have other sources to go to. The real estate portals that you can go on. And I don't need to mention the names because there's several of them. And they can see online, because 95% of people look online, if not 100%, look online first before they actually go look at the home. So therefore, their information they're getting is much greater because they can go on a house and see it's priced at 600,000, just say. And they will see all the pictures and they will say, well, that one really doesn't look like 6. It looks like 550. So I'm going to just go to the ones at 6. Like even that's the way you price homes today. So you do that eBay effect, right? Where you sort of talk about underpricing it so you can create a bidding war, which ends up selling the house more than market value. So you could do that. There's also the coming soon strategy where you don't put the house on the market, but you say it's coming soon, which builds up a pent-up demand. But sellers today have to realize that buyers set the tone, not the sellers. Will set the trend. They will pay what they will pay for a home based on its value. Agents always follow what the buyers are thinking. The sellers are always the last to know.
Okay.
Right? Because now I'm seeing some houses are on the market a little longer because sellers think the market is so great they can overprice their houses. And sometimes it's also the fault of the real estate agent who decides to convinces the seller to price it a little higher than market value in order to get the listing. And sellers have to understand that. It's called buying the listing, where the agent overprices it just to get the listing, and then the seller thinks that this agent can defy the market, which they can't.
And how do you align expectations early like being an agent, so deals don't just fall apart.
With buyers and sellers, or do you want me to separate the two?
Yes, if you can take an example here to make our audience more clearer about to so that our audience is much more clearer. They have a big picture that they can imagine and they can understand.
Well, I can actually go back to the story I had in the last episode, that one couple who was the dog pet sitter and the other one worked for market merchandising. And when I first met with them, I sat with them and consulted with them, which every agent should do. All right. You don't meet a buyer or seller you don't meet a buyer for the first time by meeting them at the house. So we sat, we talked, we went through the whole real estate transaction together. I gave them a copy of a contract so they knew what they were getting themselves into. I gave them a copy of the code of ethics so that they knew what to expect from me. And we kind of discussed whose job is whose, right? My job as a real estate agent is to do this. Your job as a buyer is to do this, and questions you can ask me because I can't tell you. And we could talk about that at another point. And then I said to him, we are now in a true seller's market, and you're going to have to make offers on at least 5 homes in order to maybe get one to have your offer accepted. So this couple were expecting it, and it ended up being 16 homes before they got one. Offers on 16 homes before they got one. But they were expecting it. Were they disappointed when they lost offers? Sure, but they knew what they were getting themselves into. And now they're happy. Their house has gone up in price by at least 10% since they bought, and makes me feel good when that happens.
Awesome. And when is the point when you should tell a buyer that you are overreaching?
It actually starts when they have trepidation. You have to kind of we have to be psychiatrists as well as
Mm-hmm.
salespeople and psychologists. So it's really asking the right questions and getting the information. Like, I could tell you that I just lost a buyer who decided not to buy at all because they were coming from out of state. They were coming from an area where it isn't a buyer's seller's market as it is here. So they made an offer on a house. It was accepted, but the seller didn't sign fast enough. So they therefore got a little frustrated, the buyer, and said, forget it, I'm not waiting. As much as I could talk to them, they just wouldn't listen. So then we found another house, which was actually nicer, and they made a full price offer. There were 6 or 7 other offers on it. And I told them from the beginning, if you're in a bidding war, you have to go as high as you can. That was the highest they could. So they didn't get it. They were disappointed, and they decided to not buy. Instead, they're staying in their apartment, paying $3,400 a month, which to me is nuts. It would have cost them less to own a home, but sometimes there's a point where you realize, and I realized, that they weren't ready to buy yet. So they were overreaching. $3,400 a month is a lot.
Yes, it is.
It's a lot of money. Nice town, 2-family home. I mean, and they were paying all their utilities. So it's really funny. Like, we talk about psychology. Somebody can come to me and say they're qualified to buy. So financially they're qualified, but psychologically they're not ready. And
And
sometimes it takes a little while before they realize now it's time, or maybe it's not time. And sometimes it's the agent. I mean, I could tell you I've made mistakes where I've taken people out too long and they end up not buying from me and not buying at all. So sometimes you can't feel out your clients as well as you think you can. Or sometimes you think it's like a challenge to me. I'm going to find a place for this person. So then you have to listen to other people. Like my wife, who's more astute than I am, says, why are you still showing them these people? They're not buying from you. So I said, because it's a challenge. Well, that was probably a waste of 8 months. And she was right. So always listen to your spouse or to your loved one.
it is true, but I want to understand what is the time limit or something like that, that, hey, I'm just wasting my time and it's of no use.
That's that's a good question. Sometimes you know right away if they're just spinning your wheels.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's the questions you ask. Like, I'll ask a buyer, if I showed you a house today that you fell in love with, are you ready to buy the house today? And then if they say, well, not really, we're just looking, or my mom said I should look at 100 houses before I buy one. So I wouldn't say it to him, but I would love to say to him, well, call me after you see 95 houses, so then I could show you the last five and sell you something. But I won't do that. But that brings me to another point. Not so much when my mom says, but when they start talking about their parents, or their parents start wanting or a part of this whole transaction, whether it's financially or just being the parent that you should be. You got to take the parents with you. You can't wait till that last house, the house that they make the offer on. You've got to show the parents everything that you've shown their kids so they realize, you know what? It wasn't such a bad decision. Because the parents want to protect their kids, and I get it. So the parents will come to the house that they chose and they'll just put it down. Not all parents, but some parents will. And they'll kill the deal, is what they will talk their kids out of buying it. And that's why you want to get them involved as soon as possible. Even though they're not the ones buying it, they're the ones that are helping make the decision. So
Understood.
there's a lot of questions you have to ask. It's more than like how many bedrooms, how many baths. It's like, where do you want to be? Why do you want to be there? If we found you something that was perfect, would you be able to go forward with it as soon as possible? And then you kind of get their mindset.
Understood. So, Jeff, now I would like to move to other part where emotions are involved on both the
Okay.
sides, like the buying and the selling. So, for the first time buyers, they often fall in love quickly, while first time sellers are emotionally attached to their homes. How do emotions show up differently on each side?
Well, with the seller, it's their first home. They have this connection to it, whether it's they had their first child there or because it's just because it was their first home, so they put work into it. And now they feel like, I did all this work and we fell in love here and we had our kid here. We love our neighbors. You've got to get them out of, like I said before, get them out of the mindset that once their house is on the market, it's not their home anymore. It's a house. And all those memories you can take with you, especially those first time home sellers that have been in their house for 20, 30 years. People stay in their house for years. So that's even a bigger thing because then all of a sudden, oh, but we had our grandkids over and things like that. So you've got to get them out of the mindset that it's their home. It is just a house. That's all it is. You have pictures, you have memories. They're going to be with you forever. Now it's time to make your move. You've already put your house on the market, so you obviously started the first step. Now you have someone that actually wants to buy your home and treat it as if you treated it. Here's a new family, if it's a first time buyer, that want to move into your home because of what you put into it. They saw the love, and therefore now they want to continue that love into the home. So that's actually sometimes harder than a buyer. Yes, buyers fall in love. So you got to prepare the buyers that you can fall in love with your house right away. Right? See a house you like. Yes, you got to like it, but don't fall in love because it may or may not work. And I don't want you to be disappointed. So that's really you got to do. You got to prepare them for all situations. That's why that consultation is really important. It's not just, again, bedrooms, baths. This is what you're going to run into. Here's the steps to buy. You might go there and you might fall in love with it and you have a home inspection and they find out the house is collapsing. All of a sudden their mindset changes a little bit and says, maybe I don't love the house as much as I thought. So I think it's realistic expectations for the buyer and the seller and giving them those expectations so they know that they're not going to be too disappointed. It's not going to always work, but you got to do your best as an agent.
When do you have to protect buyers from themselves in this process?
Again, it's that whole preparation and expectation thing. And you've got to be like, feel their emotions. Um, like a real estate agent has to be kind of even keel, right? You are their voice of reason. Sometimes I feel like I'm one of their parents. And I don't mind that. I really don't mind that because, and I'm at a point in my career now that, even my kids said to me, you are now like one of the old real estate agents. So now you've got to play that, not old age wise or thinking wise, but someone who's been around for a while. So you've got to play that as you are going to help them because you are at that age that you've had the experience and that
Experience,
you,
yes.
yeah, and that you have the demeanor to help them get through all the things that they need to go through. So it's all based on expectations. It's all based on, the highs and lows of real estate. Has to do with expectations, has to do with being an even keel, has to do with empathy. Empathy is huge for buyers and sellers, not sympathy. All right. You can't sympathize because you're on their level. You have to have empathy, meaning that you are the parent figure. And that's what I feel like. I'm there to be there, someone to yell at, someone to have joy with, someone to get upset about, hopefully not about me, but about the transaction, because there's a lot that goes on in a transaction, obviously. There's a lot of pieces that have to be put together to make this work. And if they know what's happening before it happens, the good and the bad and the ugly, then at least they're prepared for it.
Jeff, have you ever, had to pause a deal because emotions were out of control?
Pause a deal or terminate one.
It can be any. Like, have
Okay.
you witnessed something like this where emotions just are running in full speed and they went out of control?
Yeah, but some of that happens not so much with the buyer and seller, or that does happen a little bit, is with attorneys. Sometimes attorneys get in the way of transactions, which sometimes becomes more emotional because now they make their clients emotional. So there was a transaction I had, and it was the town that I live in. And I was a listing agent, and I knew the buyer's agent, great agent. And the seller's agent was very hard to get in contact with. Like, it took weeks for attorney review where it should take less than a week. And then when they did the home inspection was done. There were some items that had to be done, and there were some issues that had to be addressed. And the attorneys are supposed to review the issues. And the buyer's attorney sent the seller's attorney the list of items to take care of. Seller's attorney just he wouldn't even answer, like wouldn't even respond. And I'm talking about not just one day, I'm talking about 2-3 weeks. So now you have two agents that are like, what's going on? You have a seller that needs this to close because he already bought a house out of state. And then you had a buyer who actually worked in the town I worked in because they worked for Public Works, and they needed to close because their lease was up, or there was a couple of issues. So it was the attorneys that got in the way. Both clients were saying, what's going on? So the other agent and myself negotiated the inspection issues. Then I received a letter from the seller's attorney warning me that I was acting as an attorney because I was practicing law, which I was not. I was negotiating inspection issues. So sometimes I had to step in and send him an email saying, how dare you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was pretty upset. How dare you say that when real estate agents negotiate inspection issues all the time? It is not illegal. I wasn't playing lawyer. So
Was he new to the handling
no,
such deals?
no,
That
he wasn't.
attorney?
He wasn't new, but he wasn't strictly a real estate attorney. So sometimes when you hire like my cousin Vinny to do something in law that is outside of their specialty, they have, they're not adept to it. A lot of real estate attorneys now have paralegals who are amazing, and they know the steps to do. And then the attorney steps in when there's a problem. So he did not have a paralegal that did real estate law. So
Okay.
he was on a case which had nothing to do with real estate, but it got in the way of working this out. So you find it between attorneys, not all the time. Some of them are really good. You find it with buyers who are definitely get upset about things because it's very emotional. And they can get upset. Sometimes they'll blame the agent. Sometimes they'll blame the seller. Sometimes they'll blame each other. So yeah, it does happen. It definitely happens. That's why I have to be even keel, be ready for those emotions.
So, what did you do to that deal? Did you pause or did you just terminate?
No, then he never, when I sent him that letter, that email, he all of a sudden became very nice. And all of a sudden he started responding, and we ended up closing, and everybody was happy. My seller moved out of state. I think he moved to Arizona, and then the buyer still lives there. So
Amazing.
yeah. So it's not just buyer seller. It's not just buyer against agent, seller against agent. Sometimes it's attorneys as well. But sometimes you have to take control. Sometimes not. Sometimes you let just flow. You oversee everything, but you let it flow because you have all the right pieces.
Yeah, you were letting it flow, but then you also needed attention that, hey, we are doing something serious here.
Yeah, exactly.
Understood. So now I would like to come on the inspection and condition, understanding how inspection and conditions work on both the sides. So we all know that inspections can be stressful for everyone. How do you explain inspection reports differently to buyers and sellers?
So, state of New Jersey requires that all sellers complete a property disclosure form. That property disclosure form is then sent to the buyer. The buyer the seller has to sign it, first of all. Then the seller's agent has to sign it, but the seller's agent has to attest that with visual inspection, that everything that the seller has said is true based visually. Again, I'm not an expert on heating systems, nor would I know something is really asbestos that I can't say, maybe or may not be, but it should be inspected. So I have to sign to that. However, as an agent, before you sign a property disclosure signed by the seller, you need to make sure that the seller is actually correct. If you see, for instance, the seller said there was never a flood in the basement, just say, and you walk in the basement and you see that half the wall from the halfway to the floor is gone, you're going to question that seller. So by law, the seller said to me, well, don't say anything because it did flood once. I have to, as an agent, required to tell all any material facts about the house. So anyway, property disclosure is completed, signed by the seller, signed by the agent. Agent has already said that they did a visual inspection. So the agent is not liable if there's something that seller didn't tell you, but if it's something that they allowed the seller to put in, even though it wasn't true, then the agent can be liable. Then when the buyer wants to make an offer, before they make an offer, they take a look at the property disclosure form. So they review it. It is signed by the buyer, signed by the buyer's agent. So the buyer at least has an understanding of what they're buying, and their offer is going to be based on that, hopefully. That also includes lead paint disclosures. Then the buyer will then not always, some buyers will actually forego doing the home inspection, which I don't recommend. And so they know what they're going to get themselves into because they kind of already know the house. They know the age of the furnace because it's in the disclosure, the age of the roof. All those things are important. So the home inspector is supposed to look for things that are not disclosed or things that may be misdisclosed, if you might say. So they have to be prepared for that. Home inspectors play a big role too. They have to be diligent, of course. They have to point out everything, which is okay, which they should, but they can't, they have to be, they can't scare tactics. Like there's some home inspectors that are very difficult, meaning that they will scare the buyer out of buying versus saying, this is an older home and you're going to expect these things.
So is this home inspector related to the buyer's side or the seller's side?
I'm sorry, it's a buyer's home inspector. Some sellers will actually do pre-inspections for the seller. Some sellers will be okay with it. Some sellers won't do it because that means that once they do the inspection, they have to disclose it. But by law, you're supposed to disclose things anyway. And the agent's supposed to disclose things because the buyer needs to know what they're buying. So home inspections are done. The reports are done. Then the buyer has to decide if they want the seller to do everything or some things. And then there's a negotiation involved. And then hopefully the seller will either remediate or give the buyer a credit at closing for those items. So the buyer can do it themselves, which I always favor, with the exception of some things. Like if there's an underground oil tank, I would not have the buyer take that over. I would have the seller take care of it. Or a septic tank that fails, right? Because failing septic tank could cost up to $70,000 to replace. An underground oil tank that's leaked could cost tens of thousands of dollars. So you don't want to put that on the buyer. Part of the other inspection part of it too is what is known as getting an OPRA report from the town. OPRA stands for Open Permit Registration Act, to see whether or not that the permits that were issued for work that was done in the house were closed. And you want to make sure permits were done, but buyers need to do that. I ran into one situation and it was in the town of Lincoln Park, which is in Morris County, where my buyer bought this nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. They did an Oprah report and they find out that the bathroom in the basement, the second bathroom, there was never a permit issued. So then we investigated and we found out when the seller bought the house, the seller bought a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, but they were selling a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So the seller put a bathroom in without a permit. So my buyer said, I'm not taking that chance unless the seller's willing to get a permit and have it closed. And this seller didn't do it. My buyer moved to the next house. But beyond that, now that the town knew that there was no permit for that bathroom, they still required the seller to get a permit.
That's fair.
It wasn't done correctly. They'd have to do it correctly or take the bathroom out. And if they kept it, they would have to pay the difference in real estate taxes for the number of years they put the bathroom in. Because the reason why people don't get permits is because, number one, they want to do it themselves. They want to pay a contractor. Number two, because they don't want to pay the permit fee, which is very inexpensive. Or number three, your taxes are raised because your value of your home went up. Now, the sad thing was that the owner's wife was a real estate agent. Now, why didn't she know that? Or she thought she could just get away with it.
This brings me to a question, Jeff, that when do agents hurt deals instead of help them?
Oh, that's an awesome question. You know why? Because agents
Why?
talk too much. Just like I'm doing now, agents will talk themselves out of deals all the time. There was a great book, was written by Michael Mayer, I'm pretty sure, and says, Do you know when to shut up? And it's apropos. Only give your opinion when you're asked your opinion. Don't talk your buyers out of buying something you really want to buy because you think that the house is on the market for more than it is. You got to think as an agent, buyer makes an offer with their head, but always buys with their heart. Maybe I wouldn't pay that price for that home, but it ain't my money. So agents will talk their sellers out of taking a great deal. Sometimes it's because maybe a higher price came in, but the terms weren't as good. Sometimes it's because, and this is kind of low, is if the agent has their own offer on the house when there's other offers on it and convince the seller that take their offer, because then they get two sides instead of one side of a commission. So
Interesting.
whenever I present an offer, well, multiple offers, I never put the name of the buyer and I never put the agent of the buyer either. So I'll put like buyer one, buyer two, price, terms, mortgage, closing date, whatever information is important. And that alleviates a couple things. Alleviates the fact that they don't know that there's no one agent. They don't know which agent it is because maybe the seller doesn't like one of these agents. So I'm not going to let him, right? And the other part has to do with fair housing. Say they pick someone who has a name that is like theirs versus a name that is of a demographic that they don't like. You're protecting your seller that way as well, because you're protecting your seller and yourself, but you're a seller from a fair housing violation. I chose them because I like their name, things
Got
like
it.
that. Yeah.
And when does an inspection report become weaponized?
Weaponized. That's an interesting one. When does an inspection report become weaponized? There's a couple reasons. One, when the inspector is really putting down the house in a way to scare off the buyer. Sometimes, hopefully, because then the buyer will look at another house and will get another inspection. So the inspector will get two inspections out of one inspection. That doesn't happen a lot, but I've seen it happen. It becomes weaponized when during the heyday of real sellers market, the sellers would say, you know what? I have 30 other offers. I'm not going to do that for you. Or becomes weaponized when the buyer asks way too many items or way too big of a cost concession of the seller, right? Well, the roof is 20 years old and only has 5 years left, so I'm going to ask for a new roof or things like that. So that's when it becomes weaponized. When they take the inspection and they overuse it to either kill the deal or try to get as much out of the seller as they want and the seller not complying.
So, Jeff, now I would like to move a little away from the inspection and come into the market reality and timings. So, In the last episode, we talked about why education alone doesn't create competence. Today, we are applying that. What does competence actually look like when buyers and sellers they both collide?
Good negotiation. It's all about negotiation. It's all about, at the end of the day, everybody has to feel like they won.
What matters more than market headlines?
What matters more in market headlines? Putting buyers and sellers together. I guess that's the answer. I'm not sure what you're really asking.
So the question is like I would like to repeat this question that today we are applying what does competence actually look like when buyers and sellers they both collide? And you said negotiations, right? But apart from negotiation, what matters more than the market headlines? Like how do I explain this?
You mean like today's a seller's market, tomorrow may be a buyer's market, or looking at
Yes.
well, it's really like, again, going back to expectations from both parties so that you don't run into that. Worst case scenario, this may happen. So be prepared, but I'm going to be with you through that. Negotiations, again, plays a really key role. For instance, when you come to say you come to a price negotiation and you're $10,000 off. Seller won't budge. The buyer won't budge. On the seller side, you've told them, well, houses are not selling at this price. Maybe you could come to the middle. And this says, no way. The buyer says, no, because I'm not coming up with another $10,000. So sometimes you got to reduce this to the ridiculous. So you're at $10,000 apart and the buyer's putting down 20%. So at $10,000, the buyer only has to put another $2,000 down because that's your 20% down, right? So they're only really putting down another $2,000. They're going to be financing another $8,000. That's a lot of money. Well, not really, because for every $1,000, based on today's rates, it's about $6 per thousand. So you take $6 per thousand times the 8,000. So it's 6 times 8, which is what? 50, math, right?
Yeah.
50. I can't
6
think
into
of
8 is 48.
Yeah, 48, right? Uh, $48 a month. So you're going to lose this house over $48 a month, which is what? 4 coffees at Starbucks? 5 coffees at Starbucks? So you reduce it down to the ridiculous. And once you do that, they realize, you're right. I love this house. I could skip a couple Starbucks a week or whatever it is. So that's what you got to do. You've got to make them realize that you're too close. You can't lose this, especially if you love this home. The same thing when in a bidding war, I'm not going to pay more than full price, or I don't want to go too high, or I say, well, then just offer the best price you think you want to pay. And if you lose, and if you are upset that you lost it over by $100, then you didn't go to your highest and best, right? So they have to feel comfortable. So I think all those expectation things really work.
Yeah, I think that it is a mix of right negotiation and setting up the expectation upfront. And when we are talking about negotiation, I would like to ask, negotiation is where buyers and sellers often misunderstand each other. How do you explain offers so neither side takes things personally?
Tell them it's a business. It's like buying a car. You negotiate a car too. So you're selling, Mrs. Seller, you're selling the car. The buyer's coming in, they want to buy this car. You are also, so you have to realize that people want the best price to buy it for. They want value and you want the most money. So you will come to a deal. If a buyer wants to buy this house and a seller wants to sell this house, you will make a deal. It'll come together.
And what do buyers need to understand about making offers?
Well, they have to look at the market. They have to look at what they're up against. They have to look at what's sold recently. But they also have to look at what else is on the market and what the listings competition is. They have to understand that they qualify for a certain amount. But that doesn't mean they have to go up to that price. I see a lot of times where someone may qualify for 700,000, but they don't want to buy a house for more than 550 because that's what they feel they can afford. So that's what they have to look at. They have to look at where they feel comfortable and are they willing to go up in price because this is a house for them. I am not going to tell them what to pay for this house, right? And they ask me, and I say I can't. All I can do is show you what's sold recently. and tell you you're going to pay for whatever you think this house is worth. I could tell you it's worth 500 or wouldn't pay more than 500, but you'll be really mad at me if the house sold for 505, right? Of
Right.
course you would. So I can't do that. So an agent's got to realize it's not their money. You're protecting your clients, but it's not your money. It's not your house. And that whole thing back with again, I'll go back to expectations, the buyer and seller consultation.
Understood. And now talking about the seller side, what do sellers need to understand about receiving offers?
Well, always be grateful, no matter what the offer is, because it's somebody that wants your house. Even if the offer is low, you got an offer. And maybe they're just testing you. So let's test them back. Like
Hmm.
I've seen where offers are really low because the buyer they want to steal the house. And the seller says, I'm not entertaining this offer. So why not? This could be the only offer you get. And understand that the offers that come in are what buyers are saying what your house is worth. So let's test them. Let's see how far they can go. Let's come back at them with an counter offer of 10,000 less or whatever we can play with. So, okay. And eventually the buyer will say, oh, he's not fooling around. All right. So I have to come up in price.
Jeff, when is walking away the right move for both the sides, like for buyers and sellers?
When you hit a real impasse, whether it's a home inspection issue, whether it's a seller that just says, you know what, I can't deal with this person,
We are talking about the buying side or the selling side?
both sides. With the buying side, there's a time when either one, they're not ready to buy yet, or two, there's a home inspection issue that they know it's going to cost too much and the seller won't do anything about it, or three, they lose their job. I mean, that happens. But the big thing is part of the negotiating, they don't, the seller won't come down to their price or the buyer, they just won't match and it will be too far apart. And again, sometimes they're just not ready to buy it. There's always buyer's remorse. Every time anyone makes an offer, there's going to be buyer's remorse if their offer was accepted. So the question is, how do you handle that remorse? What I'd like to do is I would call that buyer the night that the seller accepted their offer. Hasn't gone through attorney review. They just accepted your offer. And I would call them up and say, I'm just sitting here with my significant other. And we're having a glass of wine and we're celebrating your purchase because I think you're doing the right thing. It fits your family or whatever fits you. The seller is, I think, going to work well with you, things like that. So this at least gives them a little bit of makes them feel a little
Assur-
comfortable.
yeah, assurance.
It gives them assurance because again, going back to the parent thing, because
Yes.
sometimes like you got to be like their parent. So I'm not going to say it's not going to die later on for the home inspection, but at least they feel comfortable that they made the right decision for them and their family.
And from your experience, where does a good agent add the most value that buyers and sellers don't always see?
That's a great one. So it has to do with being with your client the entire transaction. You don't want to put a contract together and then you don't hear from the agent again. You want to make sure that the agent is following through with the contract, calling their clients at least once a week, if not more, being there for the home inspection, being there for the appraiser, being there at the closing. I'm a big advocate of going to real estate closings because it is the culmination of everything that you did up until that point. I know there are agents that don't go to their closings, whether it's time or whatever, but then I think the whole transaction loses because you weren't there. You were there from the beginning. You should be there at the end and beyond that. Plus, that's when I pick up my check, which always works.
Jeff, what problems do agent prevent behind the scenes?
That's great. There are times when behind the scenes, you can get things like an attorney. Well, when the attorney that represents your client calls you, says, I've run into a problem. I'm not ready to call my client yet. What can you do to help it out? There are other times when, again, like the story I gave before, when the attorney wasn't responding. I didn't tell my client everything I did. I probably should have, especially the email that I sent them, but I was really mad. And also the conversations you have with the other side, meaning the other agent that sold it if you're not on both sides and getting through some of those issues that may not pertain directly to your client, but you definitely pertains in a sense. Like my manager told me blah blah blah, or I'm waiting for this document, things like that. So, but I think it's important that the agent tells their clients everything that they're doing because it gives you value too. Like, for instance, on the listing side, when you take a listing, you have to market the property. So this week I put an ad in that, and then I put something on social media, and it looks like we had 100 hits on it. The analytics tell me that your property on this portal got so many page views and so many hits. So, and then this week I did that, and this time I did that. So during the listing period, you should show that you are worth what you are being paid for, right? Because it's a lot of money when you list a house with an agent. It's not cheap. I know that, but I'm worth it, and every agent should be worth it. But you got to show it to your client, not to yourself. I have a big ego, so yes, of course I'm worth it. But my client needs to know that I'm worth it. You have to show your value when you first meet with them to get the business, and then prove what you said is what you actually, you're doing what you said you did. And always under promise and over deliver. That's another thing too. And same thing with the buyer. You know, you're sending your buyer listings, but then you say, you know what? I saw this perfect home. I think you should go look at it. Let's go tonight at 7 o'clock if you're available. And then go through, when you walk through the house, point out things more than the pretty kitchen. You know, that's a big thing too. Agents should know how houses are built. They should once in a while walk in a basement. Now, I remember there's an agent I used to work with years ago. She was a wonderful woman, but she would never go into the basements. She would tell her clients, go in the basement yourself and then tell me what you think when you come up. It's like, really? So if you keep your clients abreast of what's going on, they'll appreciate and that's it.
Okay, so Jeff, this is the last question of this episode. What is that one biggest thing agents get wrong when trying to keep the peace?
Get emotional. That's the biggest thing they get wrong is get their emotions in the way of making the transaction work. Just like I said before, you need to be the calming influence. You need to be the parent in the room. And you can't do that if you're sympathizing with your clients instead of empathizing with them, right? Always say, I'm so sorry it didn't work, but don't cry with them because it's, you got to empathize. You have to be the calming, I'll say it 100 times, calming force. You have to be the calm of the storm.
Like the anchor? Like just be the
Yeah,
anchor in their life?
that's great. That's a great way to say it.
Got it. Jeff, this episode was about understanding both sides of the transaction and how the right guidance can make all the difference. What today we made clear is deals don't just fall apart because of paperwork. They fall apart because of emotions, ego, and misunderstanding. Am I right?
You are totally correct. 100%.
So, Jeff, thank you so much for reminding us that real competence in real estate isn't built by time alone, but how and what we chose to learn. In the next episode, we'll explore why teaching real estate concepts to high school students might be the key to reshaping the future of the entire industry and what adults can learn from the way young minds think. So, Jeff, what do you say? Do you have anything to share with our audience?
The only thing is, it was great seeing you again, and I really had fun with this. And I'm actually looking forward to talking about my high school class that I'm teaching. So I look forward to our next session.
That's amazing. So, everyone out there, you please, until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep talking about real estate. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.